Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a really hot debate that's probably happening in a school district near you right now. We're unpacking a fascinating speech outline that makes a pretty bold case. Instead of the total smartphone bans that are sweeping across schools today, this author argues for something called digital discipline. So whether you're a parent, a teacher, a student, or honestly just someone curious about how we handle tech in society, this is for you. Let's just jump right in and see what they have to say.
Okay, to kick things off, the author paints this incredibly stark contrast to really hook us. Picture a corporate boardroom, right? Or maybe a huge university lecture hall. In these adult spaces, people are constantly on their phones. They're collaborating, they're checking schedules, pulling up data. It's just totally baked into how they work. But then, flip that and look at a typical high school classroom. The text describes this all too familiar scene. A teacher burning 5 minutes of precious class time just arguing with a student to put a piece of glass into a locker. The author basically says, we call this education, but right now it's really just an expensive game of hide and seek.
That brings us to Section 1, the smartphone ban problem, and why it's just treating the symptom.
So the argument here is that school boards are kind of making a massive medical error in their policies. They're totally misdiagnosing the issue. They see this super obvious symptom, which is student distraction. And look, it's a completely understandable frustration for teachers, no doubt about it. But the author argues that the actual disease here is a fundamental lack of digital discipline. By just slapping a blanket ban on phones, schools are only temporarily hiding the distraction. They're completely failing to cure the underlying disease, which leaves kids with zero skills to actually manage their own attention.
And treating just the symptom? Well, the source says it creates a total cascade of unintended consequences. First off, it creates this totally artificial environment that literally doesn't exist anywhere else in the real world. Because of that, it actively fails to prepare students for the society they're about to step into. Plus, and we'll dig into this more in a second, it deepens digital inequity among students. And finally, it just wastes so much critical instructional time. It forces teachers to act like police officers instead of, educators. It's basically presented as a huge lose-lose situation.
Moving right along to Section 2, the phone-free world myth and how this impacts preparation for adulthood. The text hits us with a pretty undeniable truth here. High school is the final runway before kids take off into the adult world. And guess what? The adult world does not have phone bans. Your boss isn't making you check your iPhone at the office store, right? The argument is that if you shield students from temptation by just taking the device away, you're doing absolutely nothing to teach them how to handle that temptation once the ban is gone after graduation. To prove this, the author points out a list of everyday adult tasks. In college or out in the modern workforce, smartphones aren't just for scrolling social media. They are mandatory tools. Think about it. You need two-factor authentication just to log into your work email these days. You have to use communication apps like Slack or Teams. You're managing your entire calendar digitally. The speech argues that banning these devices right before adulthood literally robs students of the chance to learn how to use these mandatory tools like professionals.
And to really hammer this point home, the author uses this brilliant analogy. Think about driving. You don't teach a teenager how to drive by keeping them as far away from cars as humanly possible and then just tossing them the keys on their 18th birthday, right? That would be crazy. You put them in the driver's seat, you buckle them up, and you put a trained guide right next to them. The text argues that schools have to be that guiding instructor in the passenger seat, helping kids navigate these digital roads safely.
Which leads us into Section 3, the enforcement and safety trap, and the real-world consequences of prohibition. Thousands. That is the staggering number of cumulative hours lost globally to what the author creatively calls the compliance tax. Educators are losing thousands of hours, not teaching, but basically acting as compliance officers enforcing these bans. So instead of diving into math or history, they're writing up detention slips because a phone slipped out of a kid's pocket. The source argues this tax doesn't just waste time, it totally wrecks school culture. It creates this combative adversarial vibe between students and staff, which completely erodes the trust you actually need for a good education. The text also brings up a pretty sobering reality about school safety. Safety is just a constant mental weight for parents and students right now. The speech points out a really interesting psychological dynamic here. Severing a student's direct line to their parents during the day doesn't magically make the classroom feel safer. Actually, cutting that lifeline can massively spike a kid's anxiety. And as the source points out, a brain that's operating in a state of high anxiety literally cannot learn. So the ban itself might actually be ruining the exact mental state required for learning. Now let's look at Section 4, Bridging the Digital Divide, where we see technology acting as a democratizer. The source shifts gears here to talk about a massive issue, equity. Look, it's super easy to write off a smartphone as just a distraction machine.
But for a ton of underprivileged students, that phone is often the most reliable piece of tech they own. In a lot of cases, it's literally their only computer. The speech argues that if we only treat phones like a nuisance, we are completely ignoring how they level the playing field for kids who don't have fancy high-end laptops waiting for them at home.
I mean, let's look at how these devices are actually being used for learning. Kids are basically carrying around pocket supercomputers. They use them as instant, totally free graphing calculators, which, by the way, usually cost well over $100. For English language learners, they are real-time translators, so they can actually follow the lesson. They're instant access portals for stuff like Canvas or Google Classroom when the school Wi-Fi inevitably crashes. The author's point is that banning phones inadvertently punishes the exact students who rely on them the most just to keep up.
All right, finally, Section 5, Building True Digital Discipline Through Structured Integration. So, what's the solution? The text proposes this structured, policy-driven model. Think of it like a red light, green light system. It's all about crystal clear boundaries. During a red light zone, say when a teacher is giving a lecture, phones are put away entirely, zero distractions. But during a green light zone, like independent research or a group project, phones are explicitly allowed and used as tools. The whole goal is to teach students context. There's a time to focus strictly on the speaker and a time to leverage your digital resources.
The speech finishes with a super clear call to action for school admins. Step 1. Stop looking for easy administrative shortcuts. A total ban might look great on paper, but the author argues it's just dodging the hard work of actual teaching. Step 2. Schools have to build robust digital citizenship programs right into the curriculum. And step 3. Explicitly teach kids when and how to disconnect. The ability to self-regulate isn't something you're just born with, it's a learned skill, and the author insists it is absolutely the school's job to teach it. As we wrap up, the author hits us with this really powerful metaphor. A total ban is basically a wall built against the future, and history shows us that walls like that always crumble eventually. The plea here is to stop trying to artificially reconstruct a 1990s school system. It's just not reality anymore. The argument urges educators to face forward and build up students who are actually equipped to handle the incredibly complex, tech-driven world of the 2020s and beyond.
I'm going to leave you with this final, really provocative thought directly from the source. The ultimate goal of education should not be a phone-free school. It must be a focus-driven student. Wow. That completely shifts the priority, right? Away from trying to control the physical room and toward building the internal discipline of the actual student. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. It definitely leaves us with a huge question to chew on. Are we preparing our students for the comfort of yesterday's classrooms or the realities of tomorrow's world?